Hello, this is Dr. Peter Terzop, and I wanted to address the myth of grammar, APA, and punctuation. And there's a friend of mine that always says, good grammar never goes out of style. And when grading papers, it's kind of a myth that, well, okay, I have a grammar issue, I don't know how to write papers, so that only is like, say, 10% of a paper. And then the rest of it, as long as I put stuff down, I get all those points. So I may be the worst writer in the world, but that's only 10%. And even then I should get a few points there. Not a 0, but maybe 2, 3, 4 points, maybe 6. But everything else is just because I think it, or it should be on there. It's kind of on there. And that's kind of a myth. So let's go over this a little bit in more detail. If I'm writing, let's say I'm a professor, and I'm giving feedback to a student, and it could be you or anybody, and I say, look, here's where you're at. I can sit there, and it's kind of like a pyramid, and I've talked about this in other training sessions with professors. So it's like Maslow's pyramid, hierarchy of needs, and at the first level, I can sit there and say, you need to have good grammar and writing and spelling and punctuation and APA. And then when you get there, you kind of go to the next level. Maybe that's more about I answer comments, like I can take information, research, and I can research it and get good academic sources, and I can put that in some paragraphs and then show that I can research. And then at some point, I can say, well, maybe I can put some of my feelings and experiences, or maybe you can flip those two categories, it doesn't really matter, but I can explain those things in more detail. And then the pinnacle would be is that, our next step would be is that I can sit there and actually bring these two things together and synthesize them and make some comments and ideas and analysis. And then, of course, the pinnacle is more like when you start developing your own data and you can develop your own information and analyze it. So there's this pyramid, right? And so what happens is a lot of students will sit there and say, well, Dr. Pete, you talk about grammar a lot. And it's true, I talk about it in two ways. One is you truly have to look at how you spell things and word choices and grammar and APA and punctuation. This is all very important. But these are steps that are just like in that category you talk about 10% or whatever the school decides it's worth. The other side of it is all we can grade is what we read. Okay, so that's the big myth, is that it doesn't carry over. If you cannot write, research, APA, cite, quote, any of that stuff correctly, it impacts the quality of the final work. So the question is, did you develop the work? Well, I don't know, because I can't read your spelling, your grammar, your punctuation. You lack citations, or you don't cite correctly, or you quote something, or you improperly quote it. There's all these things that go into the other side of the analysis. Now, professors can tell you whatever, like, well, there's this and that and information. They can sound really smart if they want to, and it's really easy to do. Or they can get down to brass tacks, and they can say, look, this is what a paragraph looks like, 4 to 6 sentences. If that paragraph isn't tracking 4 to 6 sentences or something close, it's probably underdeveloped. If it's tracking too much, like say double a page, say, then we can say, well, that's overdeveloped. So it's all kind of a rule of thumb, eyeballing it. But the point of it is, it's a general writing technique that can really help with your development. If you look at a nice paragraph of 4 to 6 sentences, I call it the Goldilocks effect, then you say, hey, he always talks about citing in there. Citing is an APA function, but citing over here means you've put detail. And so when you start kind of figuring that there's two splits here and that they actually work and that they go hand in hand, you can understand the information 100%. You may be able to teach it better than any professor in the world. The problem is if you can't write it and present it, it doesn't matter. So if you are turning in a final paper, that professor can't say, hey, come on over here and explain the final exam to me, or explain your final paper so I can know that you know all this. It would be a perfect world if I could sit down and teleconference with students and say, hey, talk about your final paper. I'd really like to know about it. I'd like to know everything about this topic and spend a half hour to an hour and give you a grade based off of that. I mean, it would be wonderful. Unfortunately, we don't have that type of time. You don't have that time, and I don't have that time, and unfortunately, the world doesn't work that way. So many times you have to present something in writing, a paper, a discussion post, short answer, whatever, sometimes a PowerPoint. That is what we grade. So you'll see me talk about things a lot, like, okay, the myth of grammar. Some people just think it doesn't matter. It does. If you can't clearly delineate or talk about your ideas or express them, then it becomes quite the issue. Sure, you'll lose points for the grammar, but you'll lose points for developing. They go hand in hand. If you are a gifted person and you can just write, then you're lucky. You'll get more points because it makes more sense what you're writing. Now, does that mean that person may understand it less than you? Maybe. But they're presenting it as if they know more. And that's all I can grade. That's the big thing. That's all I can grade. It's similar to when you see someone do a speech and you say, I don't think that person knows what they're talking about. And they might not know what they're talking about. Some of them we call politicians. I'm just joking. But the point being is they know how to talk, and that's what counts with what they're doing. Kind of like a salesperson. That's all that matters. But when it comes to this, writing is what counts. Unless you're in speech class, you got to do videos, right? So we have to kind of put these things in perspective. So what I'm going to suggest to you is you got to get over this one APA thing. Yes, there are things you can do, and punctuation and spell checks and gram checks and all these wonderful things that can help. But they carry over here. And the best way to give you feedback is to say, look, here's your paragraph. It's not cited. APA step. But this is what it does. It adds value and details and specific and develop your work. And it makes you research, which researching makes effort. Effort goes in the paper. Then you bring it together. Remember, we get past the APA grammar and all that. Then we have to bring in your experiences. Then we got to bring in academics. Then we synthesize. Then we create. Well, you can't get up that pyramid if you're not sitting there thinking, okay, how do I write these things? How should they look? And so, yes, they can be seen as APA steps and APA feedback, but they're really designed to show you the actual way of doing it. If a professor's reading something, 9 times out of 10, you're getting it somewhere close. That's a fact. But the problem is, are you supporting it? Especially when I teach government, I'm not here to judge your politics, could care less. So I have to look at how you support your work, how you cite your work, how you develop your work, research it, write it. That's what matters. Because if I don't understand that, then none of this matters. Okay? So this is not the longest video, but it's one that's very important because I think it breaks down the myth that grammar doesn't matter. That somehow you can be the worst writer in the world and you're most succinct. Like I just had a student recently, it's supposed to be a 10-page paper. Now, the cover page counts as one, and the reference don't count. So you're really talking about 8 to 9 pages of actual text. So students will shrink in the margins, do a 2.5 versus double space. They'll 12 pitch to 14, 16 pitch. They'll do all these little crazy things. And when you say, look, it's just not developed as much because this person did a 10-page paper, you did a 6-page paper. Well, I write concisely and this is how business world works. That's fine. That's not how it works here. So it's very important. And then when you say, well, I wrote a paper and it didn't tell me exactly how long it's supposed to be. Well, that's fine too, but if the professor doesn't think you developed it enough, then guess what? You didn't develop it enough. So that's why it's important to listen to what is being said. Some professors have differences. That's it. That's the truth. But then again, all students have differences. So that's what makes the world great. Listen to what they're saying. Read their expectations. How many students really read expectations? I'm going to bet you if I were to look at a new video I put in and say, here's my expectations, I bet you out of 100 students, maybe 15 to 20 might watch that video. And then they go back later and they say, well, I didn't understand that. Well, did you watch the video? Did you read it? No, I didn't do any of that. Well, there you go. Okay? It's not like a lawyer. You're not going to catch the professor. The professor is just going to, like I told that video, if you try to get the professor, they're just going to come back later and get you. In other words, they're not going to tolerate it. You know, they're trying to help you. They're professionals. Are there bad professors? Yes, take that off the books. There's a lot of them are good people. The vast, vast majority are good people. So work with them, communicate with them, and if you have writing issues, then don't run away from it or hide behind a rubric and say it's only 10%. That's 10% is that. The rest of it is the development side and analysis and research. And if you're not doing that, challenge it and go right at it. Because the 3 skills you're trying to get out of a class, better writing, better analysis, and better research. 3 critical skills. If you get that, you've really got a lot out of the class. So having said that, this is just a video that's been communicated. I've been talking to several students, and I think it's very valuable and timely. Thank you, and best of luck.